Hi there, everyone. It's Jamie Johns here from Sky Accountants. I'm the CEO. And in today's podcast, I've got with me Ashley Carmichael, who is a director and a senior client manager at Sky, and also our chief technical officer. Welcome, Ash. How are you today?
Hi, Jamie. I'm good. Good to be here. How are you going?
Yeah, going really well, Ash. And I'm pretty interested to hear about this long-term topic in today's podcast that's been around for quite some years, as long as I've been a tax accountant anyway. And the topic today that we're going to talk about is employees versus contractors. How long has this topic been around, do you think, Ash?
Oh, it's been around forever. I can't remember a time where it wasn't an issue, and it only seems to get more complicated the more that time wears on.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I remember when I started as an accountant and advising clients, it seemed to be a topic, and it had all types of connotations around, entitlements and how tax is treated and that type of thing. And recently, Ash, it's really become a highlight again in the news or with the ATO. Could you explain a little bit around the recent guidance, if you like, that, and what the tax office are looking at the moment?
Yeah, look, that's right. The ATO, just before Christmas in December, they've issued some draft documents. One is a tax ruling, which is TR 2022 D3.
Yes.
And also a practical compliance guide, which is PCG 2022 D5. And so they're just open for consultation at the moment. It's not the final position of the ATO, but these things don't tend to change too much. But look, essentially what's happened, they have or had a document of tax ruling from 2005 that they've sort of updated piecemeal along the way. But back in February 22, so a year ago, there were a couple of fairly important High Court decisions. They weren't actually tax decisions. They were about industrial relations issues, fair work.
Yeah.
Those were the CFMEU versus personal contracting, and there was another one, ZG Operations v JAMSEC.
Ash, just to stop you there, just to sort of give our audience context, if you like, but at a basic level, why is it important, Ash, to distinguish people from being a contractor to an employee? Like, what's the real?
That's a really good question. And look, there's a number of different areas where this comes into play. So these documents from the ATO, their focus is mainly on when they're an employee and they're a PAYG withholding obligations, but it impacts super guarantee. It impacts work cover. It impacts payroll tax.
Yes.
And then there's also all the fair work issues around, do these people need to be paid award rates? Do they get entitlements like holidays? A myriad of different things.
So it has massive impact then if someone's classified as an employee, as the half a dozen points that you've pointed out, versus being a contractor. And the business owner's obligations around the difference. So, yeah.
That's right. And from a business perspective, the risk, fairly and squarely resides with the business.
The small business.
They're the ones who cop the penalties and that sort of stuff if they get it wrong. And the other sort of issue that's emerging now is that we're seeing in this space is the sort of reputational damages that the businesses can suffer if they're seen to be not treating employees the right way, workers the right way.
And as the tax office recently, in those sort of updates that you mentioned earlier, have they really refined the criteria to help people, determine whether someone is employee versus a contractor?
Well, yes and no. So those High Court cases I mentioned, they're sort of the instigator of the ATO updating this ruling. And
Yeah.
what's not really changing is the indicia of when someone is an employee versus a contractor. That's based on case law that's been around for a long time, long time. But what those cases did was they clarified that what needs to be looked at when you're appraising those criteria.
Yes.
And so fundamentally what they said is that where there's a written contract between the worker and the business, then you have to look only at that contract at the time that it was made. And they use this terminology, an objective assessment of the contract.
Yes.
And, they're looking at specifically the legal rights and obligations that are embodied by that contract and how that stacks up against the time-honored criteria.
Yes.
And this has been a bit of a change because historically, there was this sort of look at the totality of the arrangement, not just the contract.
So this is
how things are done after the contract.
Yes. So this is more of a focus coming back to the contract at the time.
That's right. It's a fairly sort of significant shift in terms of how this stuff is looked at.
Yes.
And it, in a way, it sort of narrows it down and deals just specifically with, well, what are the rights and obligations in the contract and what do they suggest is the right classification for this worker?
So moving forward, Ash, does that affect small business historically, like someone who had a contract maybe 5 years ago, or is it more forward looking now, or just everyone?
Look, it can go back. So if you engage someone as a contractor a year ago, and that were to come into the spotlight and be reviewed now, then it would be this criteria that we're looking at to work out whether or not that person is or isn't a contractor. Notwithstanding that at the time you started working with them, the approach might have been a bit different.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that criteria, maybe?
Well, look, the criteria that we're looking for when we're trying to work out whether someone is an employee versus a contractor, at a high level, it's the terminology we use is it a contract of service, i.e. an employee, versus a contract for service, being a contractor, which is a bit of a subtlety, but essentially what you start doing is you start looking at some of these, what they call the indicia. So whether or not there's control. So if there's a high level of control, it points more towards an employee. So if the business has a fair degree of control, whether or not there's a right to delegate. So for example, if you're contracting me and I'm entitled to delegate the work that we're doing to other people, it's a fairly strong indication that it's a genuine contractor relationship. Whereas, if I'm not allowed to delegate or I've got to get your permission, it might point the other direction. Whether or not the engagements to achieve a result. So that's the classic, am I employed by the hour or by the day? Or, or am I employed to complete a certain job? Whether or not the worker provides their own tools and equipment. So if I turn up on your work site and I pick up your hammer and saw and get to work, that's indicating an employee versus, if I turn up and I've got all my own kit.
Yes.
That suggests more of a contractor.
Yeah.
The exposure to risk.
Okay.
So, a contractor should bear a level of risk should something go wrong. So whether that's, for damages or for rectification, that sort of thing. And whether or not there's generation of goodwill. So, if you think about a typical business, over time you develop some goodwill around that business.
Yes.
Whereas if it's more of an employee, there will be an absence of that goodwill. And, that can include things like, does the public see that person operating under their own business name and that sort of stuff?
Yes, yeah. So look, some of those points there, Ash, are not new in a general sense, but are they then pointing back to if there is a contract involved, then, that contract becomes a reflection of those points that you said and can hold more weight these days.
Look, you're spot on there. So those criteria are as old as the hills. That's been around for a long time.
Yes.
But what we're looking at now is, how do you assess those criteria? Going way back, you just looked at the totality of what was going on, whereas the High Court in those cases said no. We would only do that in exceptional circumstances. If there's a written contract, then we should only be looking at that contract and seeing what it's got to say, as to those points.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's certainly interesting because as you said at the start, the risk that someone, maybe was previously classified as a contractor, and then with this new guidance coming in, someone then being classified as an employee, it brings in all those obligations that, you said earlier, fair work, superannuation, the list goes on and on. So, it's a good point that, small businesses, I think, really need to get some advice on. And, is there anything that businesses should do now, Ash, with this new sort of direction that the tax office are taking? Is there things that the ordinary small business person should take action with this knowledge?
Yeah, look, there is. And this area is just such a tough area for small and medium businesses, and even for large businesses, because it's just so complicated and there's so much grey area.
Yeah.
But it's also a really risky area that, the consequences of getting it wrong can be really significant.
Yes.
Both, as I said earlier, in terms of, monetary impact.
Yes.
For example, dealing with this PAYG aspect, you can get hit with failure to withhold penalties, which are, really significant.
Yeah. What would you suggest people do then, do you think?
Well, look, they've got to do their best to get across the topic. And, these documents that I've referred to, so TR 2022 D3 and PCG 2022 D5, they're available. You can just Google them and you'll find them. And they're reasonably plain English documents. Most people have a good go at reading them, and I'd encourage them to do that. If they're using contractors. But
if they're using contractors, that's a good point.
Look, it just is an important area, and it does deserve an investment in time. But really, if you're using contractors, you need to talk to someone who's familiar with the area and get some guidance. And periodically review what you're doing. Things sort of have a way of evolving over time. And arrangements might have been kosher 12 months ago, but as they
not anymore.
Evolve,
So I think your point there is very good. Like, your message here in today's podcast is if you've got existing contractors, who should people reach out to, Ash? They can reach out to the office.
Yeah, look, your accountant's a good first port of call. Get in touch with us.
Yes.
Our whole team's right across this issue, and
yes,
absolutely willing to help people.
Yes.
And get an understanding, and also to review what's going on. There's still a bit of a wait and see approach here. The consultation process is happening. These documents might get tweaked a bit before they're finalised.
Yeah.
So we'll have to keep monitoring that, and we'll keep updating people, through our newsletters and that sort of thing.
Yes. Yes.
But it just needs time. There's other things happening as well in this space, particularly around payroll tax and businesses in the health sector. So GPs, dentists, physios, optometrists, etc. There's a fairly common practice structure they use where the professionals or the clinicians are often contractors, and there have been a couple of significant cases with state revenue officers around payroll tax, one of them in Victoria and another one in New South Wales.
So it's very, it's very important that those industries that you mentioned are really across this then.
Well, yeah, it is very much so, because those, anyone in those industries will know that those arrangements are really prevalent.
Yes, that's right.
And what the outcome of those cases wasn't great for what those arrangements are. And, there's a big question mark now whether there's sort of big payroll tax obligations.
Payroll tax, of course, the state tax, isn't it? Yeah.
But just to, keep it as complicated as possible, one of those cases, it's called Thomas and Nas. It's been appealed. It'll be heard a bit later this year.
Yes.
And depending on what the outcome of that is, that that may.
And what did that case sort of involve in a snapshot, if I could ask you?
That was a GP practice, or is a GP practice up in New South Wales.
Yes.
We're in Melbourne. And what it was is the classic structure where a number of the GPs that were operating in that practice were actually independent, and they pay a service fee to the practice for the rooms and support staff and all that, the usual business. And so what happened is as is normally the case, the practice collects all the receipts from the patients.
Yes.
On behalf of those doctors. It would then charge a service fee. It deducts that service fee and then sends the leftover money to the doctor.
Yes.
Now, it's historically been held that type of arrangement isn't one of employee or even what they call a rateable contractor.
A contractor.
And not subject to payroll tax, but of course, these decisions have sort of held contrary to that, and that payroll tax would be applicable.
And now that's on appeal.
Well, that's right. So, the Victorian case was similar, involving some optometrists. There was a few sort of distinguishing factors which murky the water there. That one isn't being appealed, but this case in New South Wales is. And at the moment, those in that industry are really sort of, everything's a bit up in the air for them. It's hard to know which way to go. So hopefully when that case is heard, so to be in the New South Wales Supreme Court, hopefully we get a decision that clears up some of the confusion. And we'll know where we stand.
Well, Ash, thanks for your time today in this podcast. Look, if anyone has contractors, we both encourage you to reach out to Sky Accountants, reach out to our office, and our team of accountants and client managers will definitely be able to help you. So thanks for your time today, Ash.
No, thanks for taking the time to chat to me.
And we'll see you in the next podcast anyway. Bye, everyone.